Hi friends, Phil Ciccio here. Many of my clients ask me oftentimes, how do I recondition my mind, or how do I reprogram my mind? They're doing things that they know they shouldn't be doing, but they're doing them anyways. And you might be in that same situation where you find yourself habitually doing things that aren't going to serve you and get you where you want to go. And then some of you also have habits that you are doing habitually, right? Things that you're doing habitually that are serving you. And you want to reprogram yourself or recondition yourself to do the things that are serving you versus the things that aren't. And people oftentimes wonder, how do I do that, right? Why do I do the things that I do even though I know I shouldn't be doing them? And the reality is this, you have been over a long period of time using self-talk to actually condition your mind to develop habits that are either serving you or not serving you. Many of these things came from maybe early on in childhood where you heard things over and over again, which eventually became programmed into you, and then you start to repeat those same stories over and over again, like things as simple as hearing your parents when you were young saying that money doesn't grow on trees, or maybe your sister's smarter than you are, or we all have big bones in our family, things like that, or we're not lucky, or those people are lucky. And you hear these stories and eventually you start to tell them to yourself, and because of the importance you put on that story, how much time over a long period of time that you tell yourself this story, how much actual intention you give that story, right? Over time it becomes deeply rooted or conditioned into your mind, and then you unconsciously behave based on that conditioning. In other words, you don't even realize you're doing it. Your thoughts sort of just drift into that direction, and you habitually begin to do things based on the story that you've been telling yourself. And so the conditioning or the programming happens some part by when you were young and what was said around you or what was done around you, the habits that you saw people doing, the beliefs people had, the way that they spoke, what they ate, what they drank, how they talked, how they dressed. You were bringing that into your unconsciousness, and eventually began to be conditioned by that. And that's why you're just like your mother, or you're just like your father. You do things habitually like they do. So that wasn't your fault, and it really isn't their fault. They were programmed or conditioned the same way. The reality is, though, some of those things are serving you and helping you in life, and some of those things really aren't helping you in life. And it's becoming aware of the ones that aren't helping you or serving you, and then altering the conditioning or reprogramming yourself, as I'd like to share with you. And so how do you do that? Many of my clients say, how do I reprogram myself? Well, it's the same way as how you got programmed in the first place, right? It's how much attention you put on something, how often you put that attention on that certain story, right? And how much intention or emotion that you give that particular story. So currently, and unconsciously, you're repeating stories in your head. You're giving it lots of attention, you're giving it lots of time, and you're also giving it lots of emotion, like, oh, I'll never amount to anything, or I'll always be overweight, or I wish I wasn't overweight, or I wish I had a wonderful, loving relationship, or I wish I was rich, or whatever it might be, or I wish I could just figure out how to, create a business that would serve me, or I wish I could find a job that was better. And we start to put all this intention on what we want in sort of a negative way, right? Like, I don't have this, or I don't have this, or I wish I had that. And all of that intention, all of that emotion over a long period of time is what causes the programming. So then when we're unconscious, which is most of the time, we start to behave in such a way that's in harmony with the programming. So imagine that your physical body is a computer, and in your brain is the hard drive, and all of that intention, all those things that you're saying to yourself happen to be the software code that you're putting onto the hard drive. Well, the hard drive doesn't reject that information. The hard drive's going to take in whatever you give it. So you put in this negative software, this self-talk, and then that software is embedded onto the hard drive, and then the hard drive takes over and operates the computer, which is your body, and you start to behave based on whatever the programming is, right? So to try to simplify this. So what we need to do in order to change the conditioning of the programming is change the software, overwrite the software code. Now, there's two ways to do that. You can crash the hard drive with a really dramatic or traumatic event happens in your life and it alters everything. Let's just say that you've been struggling with weight, and suddenly unfortunately, you have a heart attack. Well, that traumatic event could clear the hard drive, wipe out all of that software that you've been programming in there through all of your self-talk, and boom, suddenly you become healthy and you work out and you eat right and you're really conscious about this and deliberate about that. Also, something positive could happen where, let's just say that you find yourself not being disciplined, being frivolous with your money, not being in control of really building a life that supports a family, let's just say, and you don't have a family yet, but suddenly you have a baby. Well, that baby could be a traumatic event, and boom, just like that, hard drive gets cleared and wiped out, and you become responsible. You start to save money. You work harder. You don't call in sick every other week, right? You do the things that are necessary unconsciously because now you have this child in your life that you're responsible for, and that wipes out the hard drive. So there are good things and bad things that can create cleaning of the hard drive or clearing of the hard drive, but we can't expect those things to happen. I mean, we know that they will, but we can't make them happen. So the only other way is the same exact way that you had gotten the program in the first place, and that's to overwrite the old programming. So same scenario, you take the things that you don't want, the things that aren't serving you, recognize those, write them down on a piece of paper. Then on the opposite side of the piece of paper, you write down the things that would serve you. So the opposite of those things. So, you know, if you have an unhealthy lifestyle, you start to write down, I live a healthy lifestyle. I live with vibrancy and energy. I eat the right things to nourish my body, and I also exercise to keep myself energized and feeling alive. And so you create a new story based on the opposite of the old story. Or if you're in a financial situation that isn't serving you right now, you write down the situation that you're in and then find the opposite of it. You know, I'm living a life of financial freedom. You know, I earn money. It comes to me easily and effortlessly. These things are you know, I'm able to support my family in a way that gives us a sense of freedom and vitality. So you create a new story in your mind. It doesn't really matter what your situation is, but you look for the negatives and then you rewrite the story in the positives. Now, here's the hard part. It's easy to write the story, right? Many of you probably have. The hard part is to give it the intention, the emotion, and the amount of time necessary for it to overwrite the old code. And so that old story has been lingering there for a long time. It keeps coming up unconsciously. So you have to deliberately now, okay, overwrite that story with a new story. Now here's the key about deliberate and intentional rewriting of the story. It'll help reconditioning much faster than the old way because you're doing it intentionally, right? You're driving this. You're actually reprogramming your mind. And so it won't take you as long as it took you to be the way you are. It'll happen in a much shorter period of time as long as you give it the attention that it needs, so consistency. You give it the emotional, right? So the intention, the emotion that's required to actually embed this new software code, right? And you do this consistently over a long period of time. And so once we do this over and over again with a new story, we start to overwrite the code. Listen, I've done this, and I know that you've done this in some way. You may not realize it, but I've done it, right? So think about my life, right? I was an auto mechanic for most of my life. I had a good life, right? But I felt like there was more that I could do. Like I felt like it wasn't my calling. In the beginning it was, but eventually it didn't feel like a calling for me anymore. And I wanted to do something else. So I began to tell myself a new story about what I could do and how I could help others, and doing this right here on video with you, or standing in front of a group of people and having a talk or doing a workshop. Those were the things that I told myself. So I rewrote the story, and now I've traveled literally all over the country and around the world, and I'm doing this on video around the world, helping other people, just like the story I told myself, right? So I rewrote the code. Now, it didn't happen overnight, but it happened, and time's gonna go by anyway, so you might as well give this a shot. So how do you interrupt the old pattern is the key, right? So this is the second part, I guess, if you will. We've got to interrupt the old pattern because that's happening under the surface. You're unconsciously just going there. It's just automatic because it's really easy, right? It's easy to get into your old patterns of thinking because they're already programmed in. So you have to consciously and deliberately rewrite, right? You have to consciously and deliberately do something different. So how do you do that? Well, you got to wake yourself up. You got to be aware. You got to wake up, right? And this is the key. Most people are asleep, so the story that's going on in their mind is one that's already programmed in. I want you to wake up. Now, when I first started this, okay, trying to tell myself a new story and giving it intention and giving it a lot of time and emotion, I had to remind myself to do it because I'd go through my whole day and never do it, right? So the way that I did it is I used a trigger. And so for me, I live in the United States and I live in New England. And so in New England, we have a coffee shop called Dunkin' Donuts. Many of you would probably know of it if you're in the area, but some of you are around the world, so you don't know. But it's very popular, and it seems like there's one on every corner, and everyone's holding a Dunkin' Donuts cup, and there's always a logo someplace, or a sign, or a commercial. And so I use that as my trigger to remind me to get intentional with my thinking. So every time I saw a Dunkin' Donuts or a cup, I'd stop for a moment. I'd start to think about the story that I wanted to tell myself, even though I didn't know that maybe in the background I was telling myself a negative story. And I would rewrite the story. I would tell myself that story. So it was happening often because I oftentimes saw that logo or that cup everywhere. Okay. I eventually transitioned into bottles of water. So anytime I saw a bottle of water, I would do that because I saw more of those. So I was telling myself the story often. It was really a quick, just boom, just trying to implant it in there. Eventually, because I don't know where I am, like today I'm here at the beach. We live on the beach. And, oh, by the way, living on the ocean was a story I told myself long ago. And eventually it came true, right? I told myself this story of someday I'm going to be living on the beach, and I saw it, I visualized it, so I was really intentional, and suddenly I find myself living here on the ocean. So what I did was, my mentor told me try something different, because right here I'm not going to see a Dunkin' Donuts cup. Here I'm not going to see a bottle of water. So what he said was, keep in your pocket a card, all right? So just a card like this that tells you, it has your story on it, right? What it is that you truly want, what you want for your life. And so he said, keep it in your pocket, loose in your pocket or in your purse. And that way, every time you reach into your pocket for money, or you reach into your purse for money, or you reach in for any other item, like I use chapstick. So if I reach into my pocket right now, and I want to grab my chapstick, right? The card is right next to the chapstick, and I touch the card. That reminds me to tell myself the story. Now, some of the story is on this card, right? But I no longer need to really read it anymore. I just need to know that the card's in my pocket and touch the card, because when I touch the card, it triggers the story, right? It gets me to intentionally reprogram myself. So the key is here. It's change the story. It's not your fault you have the story, right? It may not be, and some of it might be because you probably caused some of the story, right? But it doesn't matter that you have the story. What matters is that you deliberately change the story, okay? So number one, create a new story. Take the negative story, recreate it so it's positive and in the present tense. Like, I'm so happy and grateful now that I'm earning it, whatever money it is that you want to earn, or I have a healthy physical body, whatever that is, okay? So make sure that you do that. Secondly, how much time you give this. In other words, you got to give it lots of time, and you've got to be doing this throughout the course of the day. And then how much intention or emotion are you giving it is going to be a real key. The more emotion, the more times you do this, the longer that you spend in that moment of being in that place. So the longer you spend in the moment, the more often you do it, and the amount of emotion that you put in it, the shorter the time period to alter the programming. Your life will radically change. I hope this served you. I hope to help. Listen, do me a favor, right? Reach out to me, right? Put your name and email on this page, or if this is on a YouTube video, click to philchicchio.com and go there and reach out to me. And I'm happy to help you. At any given time, just reach out, shoot me an email, and I'll do what I can to respond as quickly as possible and help you out. By the way, if you share this video for your friends and family, it'll help them too, so don't be afraid to share it. Thanks a lot. Thanks for watching.